Hi and welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 14 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. So you've probably already experienced the annoyance, the heartbreak and the expense of when you've made a garment project but it doesn't work out because you used unsuitable fabric. You may also have found yourself feeling overwhelmed when trying to shop for fabric, either in a bricks and mortar store or online. This particularly might be the case if you're new to garment sewing or you've recently returned to it after some years. Today's episode is a solo one in which I respond to a listener asking for help. So we're going back to the basics of fabric and laying down the foundations on which to build our knowledge of fabric types. And we'll cover what garment styles each fabric is suitable for. So sit tight for all of that. I hope you're doing okay, lovely listener, and I also hope that you enjoyed the last couple of episodes with fitting legend Kate Roberts, or at least found them useful, even if the idea of making toiles or muslins wasn't advice that you wanted to receive. I want to quickly thank everyone who got in touch with me about last week's episode, in particular the bit where Kate was responding to Clayton's question. Clayton was asking about how to visualise garment patterns on different body types. A number of you awesome listeners messaged me to suggest the My Body Model app, and that helps you make a custom croquis template of your body. You can add your own actual measurements and get a printable and digital sketchbook on which to try out different designs and styles. I'll put a link to the My Body Model app in the show notes. So have you been doing any making since last week? I've got back on my summer sewing plans horse and made my little boy a pair of summer sleeping shorts and my big girl a pair of daytime shorts, both from scraps and leftovers from previous sewing projects. I've also been doing some mending and repairs, so sticking roughly to the make one, mend one formula. I'm going to make my daughter one more pair of shorts and then I think I'll allow myself a little selfish sewing project. Not sure what that's going to be yet. Sustainability-wise this week, also related to my kids' clothing selections, I realised that my daughter has no jackets that fit her at all, only a thick waterproof coat. Not ideal for the summer. So I'm not into the idea of making kids' jackets or coats. Personally, I think it's too much work for a garment that's only going to see 1 or 2 years worth of wear. Plus I don't have any suitable fabric or patterns and I'm doing the last sew standing challenge. So it's also getting harder to find suitable stuff in the charity shop for her. She's only 9 but really needs clothes that are at least for an 11-year-old or better still a 12-year-old. And it's getting harder and harder to find things in those sizes that she really likes. And is even less likely to go into a charity shop with a specific need like a jacket and hope to tick those other boxes as well. So I turned to the Vinted app and I was able to find heaps of pre-loved options in the right size. She quickly picked out 2 different ones, a dusky pink fleecy zip-through style and a classic blue denim jacket. And then they were ordered and paid for all within 10 minutes. So that's my reminder today. If there's something specific you need for yourself or a family member, something that you just don't want to make or you can't make, don't forget to try Vinted or some other reselling app to see if you can find a pre-loved version before buying new. And whilst we're on the topic of sustainability, when aren't we? But I have a podcast recommendation for you. So if you enjoyed episode 50 of this podcast, which was The Future of Fabrics, then I thoroughly recommend that you listen to an episode of the Wardrobe Crisis podcast. The one I'm talking about is episode 188. It's called Future Fabrics, Sustainable Textiles Masterclass with Amanda Johnston. Their episode goes into the topic kind of deeper and more broadly, and it's just really, really interesting. So you can listen to it in your usual podcast app, of course, plus I've popped a link to it in the show notes. So massive thanks this week goes to Sarah for signing up to support Check Your Thread via the Patreon app this week. Thank you so much, Sarah. The Check Your Thread patrons are the wind beneath my wings, and they make it possible for me to spend the time that it takes to create this podcast. If you'd like to be part of that special gang, you can sign up for any amount you wish or are able. It literally takes about 2 minutes to sign up. It's ridiculously easy. You can find the link in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. Okay, back to today's episode. This episode is definitely more of a back to basics episode, but I think it's going to be super useful for beginners. Plus also it's a nice kind of opportunity for some revision for those who are a bit more experienced in sewing. You might learn something new or be reminded of something you've forgotten, and that might make your sewing journey a bit smoother going forwards. But before I press play on this episode itself, I just want to mention something. This episode goes into a lot of different terms, and some people might prefer to have this content presented to them in different formats. It occurred to me that I could create a downloadable resource based on this episode, along the lines of the Me Made May workbook. So if that's something that you'd like to have available to you for a small fee, let me know that you'd like me to make it via email, zoe@checkyourthread.com, or via Instagram @checkyourthread. If a number of people contact me to say that it's something they'll like, then I'll make that happen. Okay, enjoy. Recently, I received an email from a listener called Nikki. Nikki has given me permission to share the contents of that email, so here we go. I've been thinking a lot lately about types of fabric and how to choose an appropriate fabric for the garment or pattern you have in mind. By way of explanation, I am now 58 and first learned to sew when I was a teenager in the 1970s, but there was a much smaller range of fabric types to choose from back then. The options were basically cotton or polycotton, or nasty things like crimpline. Although I was given a sewing machine as my 21st birthday present, I didn't make many garments over the intervening years, and my sewing seemed to be mainly curtains and fancy dress costumes for my kids, and in more recent years, patchwork quilts. I've been getting more into garment making again in the last couple of years, but the range of fabric types now available to home sewers seems to have expanded massively. I'm increasingly confused by it all and have made some disastrous and wasteful and expensive mistakes with fabric choices on several occasions. I wonder if a podcast on this topic might be useful not only to old school but also newbie sewists and would help us make appropriate choices for garments, hopefully then avoiding mistakes that are costly in both environmental and financial terms. I thought this was a fantastic prompt for a podcast episode. Thanks, Nikki. Choosing suitable fabrics for our projects is absolutely at the core of sewing more sustainably. As you start to get interested in making, mending and altering clothing, you quickly realise that there are more types of fabric out there than you ever imagined. Plus, as new fabrics are developed and become available for home sewing, the language of sewing continues to expand. Yet through making our own clothes, we become acutely and often painfully aware of how important fabric choice is to the success of a project. We can carefully select a sewing project or pattern that we love and chimes with our style. We can make sure that the garment fits with our lifestyle and other items in our wardrobe. We can put time and effort into making a toile, pattern alterations and garment fitting. But despite all this, if the fabric is wrong for the pattern, then it's going to be a bust. Now, obviously, mistakes will be made, and that's pretty much unavoidable. And any lessons learnt through a failed project will be more keenly remembered, so there's certainly some value in that. So I don't want to make out that a failed project that occurred because of a bad fabric choice is the worst thing ever. And as previous guest Kim Whitten reminds us, sewing is meant to be a joyful experience. So we should hold a lot of this lightly, remember to laugh at ourselves from time to time, and not beat ourselves up for a mistake. But obviously, a failed project is annoying and costly. It costs us time, money, and the emotional investment in the project. Plus, there is the cost of all those resources that went into the fabric production and transportation. So we want to avoid it where possible. So today we are going back to the basics of fabric for garment sewing. So the goal is to help those who are new to sewing or, like Nikki, have returned to sewing after hiatus only to find that things have changed or expanded somewhat. So let's build up some basic knowledge about fabric so we can improve our chances of selecting something suitable for our future sewing projects. We'll also introduce some terms that you might encounter when fabric shopping with some useful context so that you can start to get a handle on them. Hopefully, the whole language of fabric will start to feel less impenetrable. If you're already well versed in fabrics, the content of this episode may be teaching you to suck eggs. However, it might still be a useful refresher, or it might be helpful to hear about fibres and fabrics in the way that I'm about to break it down. So we can start to get a handle on all the garment sewing fabrics we may encounter by looking at the differences from two different angles. 1, what different fabrics are made from, and 2, how different fabrics are produced. So when you look at the names of fabrics that are being sold for garment sewing, it can get super confusing about what they actually mean. But lots of the names you'll encounter literally follow this formula: the fibre and then the form that those fibres have been made into. So let's crack on now with what is fabric made from. The basic ingredients of fabrics are fibres, which are then spun into yarn ready for fabric production. There are 3 basic categories of fabric fibres. Firstly, natural fibres. You can get plant-based fibres, and they include cotton, flax that becomes linen, and hemp. There's also animal-based natural fibres, which include sheep's wool, mohair, angora, and silk. Natural fibres require less processing than other categories before they are ready to be used in fabric production. Natural plant-based fibres usually produce stable fabrics that are easy to sew. Right, the second category is regenerated fibres, aka semi-synthetic fibres. So these fibres are used to create viscose or rayon, bamboo, cupro, modal and lyocell or tencel. So tencel is a brand name of lyocell. These fibres start life as plant or wood pulp, or cotton linter in the case of cupro. So their basis is natural. However, the raw materials have to undergo so much processing for the fibres to become suitable for fabric production, often with the use of a lot of chemicals, that they are not classed as natural. If you have been away from sewing for years or even decades, regenerated fibres are probably the area that has grown the most. There's actually a lot of interesting development going on in this category around using different agricultural or food production waste to make wearable fabrics. Regenerated fibres tend to produce slinky, drapey fabrics, whether those are woven or knitted fabrics. Okay, and the last main category is synthetic fibres, aka man-made fibres. So well-known synthetic fibres include nylon, acrylic, elastane, lycra, spandex, which is all effectively the same thing, polyester, and metallic fibres such as lurex. These are produced at a chemical plant or in a laboratory and have been derived from polymers that are obtained from the byproduct of fossil fuels, usually petroleum. Right, so now we need to talk about fibre properties. So each different fibre type, when it's made into fabric, has its own collection of different properties. So some examples of desirable properties are moisture wicking, heat retention, holding dye well, crease resistance, a low price point, biodegradability, stretch and recovery, a fluid drape, and being lightweight. So when approaching a garment project, you can think about which properties you want from a fabric. You don't want or need all those properties for each item. So for example, you won't need the fabric to make leggings to have a fluid drape, but you will need good stretch and recovery, and perhaps moisture wicking if you're planning to use them for intensive exercise. And if you're planning to make a floaty summer top, heat retention nor stretchiness are going to be on your list for things to look out for, but maybe something with a fluid drape will be. So, some examples of negative properties: pilling or bobbling, colour fading, creasing easily, more likely to cause allergic reactions, expensive, releasing microplastics, or easily shrunk. So to reiterate, each fibre, generally speaking, has its own collection of properties that will make it more or less suitable for certain garment projects. But that's not where fabric production and therefore selection ends. A fabric can be made from one type of fibre only, or it can be made of a blend of 2 or more different fibres. Blending fibres to create a fabric allows us to include and maximise some beneficial properties whilst minimising other less desirable ones. So, some examples of common fabric blends you could find in a fabric shop: So cotton and lycra. So lycra is a brand name of elastane or spandex. So cotton and elastane blends give us the lovely feel and colour fastness of cotton. And the elastane gives us the stretchiness and recovery that is really good to have in close-fitting garments so that they don't become baggy when they're worn. Another common blend is cotton and polyester. Once again, we get the good stuff from the cotton, but the polyester usually makes the fabric cheaper and more crease resistant. Another blend you often see in knitwear is wool and acrylic. The wool gives us warmth and softness, whilst the acrylic makes it less likely to shrink when washed. Another example of a blend that you might see around wintertime is cashmere and wool. Cashmere is very warm, actually 8 times warmer than regular wool apparently. Plus it is comparatively lightweight. But wool from sheep's fleece is cheaper and pretty robust. At risk of complicating things, it is important to note, however, that some of the properties of a fabric are not due to the properties of the fibres or the way that the fabric has been formed. Some fabrics will also have been manipulated in some way, perhaps through heat processing or a chemical processing or having a coating added. So those manipulations can also help the fabric acquire or heighten different properties. Okay. So let's crack on with exploring how fabric is made, and we'll discover a load of terms related to fabric there. So once the fibres have been spun into yarn, there are 2 main ways in which fabric can be formed. There is woven and there is knitted. There is also bonded fabrics, but those are less commonly used for garment making, so I'm ignoring those for today. Right, okay, so let's talk about woven fabric first. Woven fabric is often where most people start when they're dipping their toe into garment making, isn't it? So imagine a basic loom with threads running vertically, the warp, and threads travelling horizontally, the weft. So the weft threads pass in front of and behind the vertical warp threads alternately. This simple weave pattern is known as plain weave, among other things. So the plain weave technique is used to create quilting cottons, most shirting fabrics including poplins, voile, lawn, chambray, most linen fabrics and many, many more. In fact, most of the woven fabric you will find in a fabric shop has been created using this simple weave technique. So although those different terms, quilting cotton, shirting, poplin, chambray, lawn and voile, they've all been made using that basic method, most of the difference between them relates either to the thickness, the crispiness, the drapiness, or something else that distinguishes them in some way. So let's go through them. So quilting cotton tends to be very stable and easy to handle. There's actually quite a lot of debate about whether or not they are suitable for garment making, but you can totally make shirts and dresses out of them as long as they're styles that don't really require very much drape. Shirting and poplin fabrics are kind of what it says, the kind of fabrics that you'd use to make a button-up shirt. So they are great options for lots of other types of garments as well, including anything that requires like a bit of volume, such as gathered tiers or puffy statement sleeves. Shirting and poplin fabrics have like a lovely crispness to them, but they're also usually like lighter weight than a quilting cotton. So chambray is a fabric that is often used for making shirts as well. It's made using a coloured thread, which is usually blue, in the warp, and white threads in the weft. So when the coloured thread is blue, it can actually have like a similar appearance to denim, which it can sometimes get confused for. So lawn fabrics, such as cotton lawn or viscose lawn. These are lighter weight and a bit more drapey than a shirting or poplin. Cotton lawn is lovely to work with. It's quite stable and well behaved. And viscose lawn is drapier and slinkier than cotton lawn. Lawns are arguably most suitable for blouses and tops, but also possibly dresses if the lawn in question isn't too sheer, or I guess you're planning to line it. Okay, so voiles, such as cotton voile or viscose voile, are even lighter and more drapey still than lawn. They are usually very sheer, which is also why they are often used for sheer curtaining. So as I say, plain weave fabrics are the most common in a fabric shop. But there are other types of woven fabric weaves, and 2 others that I'm sure you will find in a fabric shop are twill weave and satin or sateen weave. So let's go through those. So twill weave is identifiable because if you look close, you'll kind of see like a diagonal line. It's used to create gabardine, tweed, and most famously denim. However, it can also be used to create finer fabrics with fibres such as viscose and tencel. So the diagonal pattern makes it comparatively strong because it's harder to tear than a plain weave. It's also comparatively flexible as well. So although twill is a type of weave, if you see the word twill written on a pattern envelope or a fabric roll, it's probably referring to a medium to heavyweight woven cotton or cotton blend using the twill weave technique. So gabardine is usually used for structured outerwear. Tweed is typically pretty thick and itchy, so it's usually used for like suits and other kind of structured garments that won't be sitting next to the skin. So denim is a broad term that can include like lightweight fabrics suitable for shirts and dresses, right up to super stiff and hard-wearing workwear. So when picking denim for a specific project, you need to concentrate on two things. Do you require any stretch content? And how heavy do you think the denim needs to be? So finding out if there's any stretch content is fairly easy because that will be in the listing, or you can give the denim a tug if you're shopping in person. But in terms of weight, so once again, you can kind of feel the denim in the shop. However, if you're buying it online, it can be more tricky. So often like denim fabric listings on a website will include the weight. That's often shown either in ounces, which is ounce per square yard, or in GSM, which is grams per square meter. I know that sounds a bit confusing, and I'm not going to go into it more today, but there are ways of figuring out what kind of weight is suitable for your project. So if your pattern doesn't specify a weight of denim, you can either order a swatch to gauge suitability until you start to understand these weights, or I would recommend doing an online image search for that denim weight and then compare the types of garments that have been made in it that you see on the image search with what you're hoping to achieve. Another popular twill is tensile twill, and this is a type of fabric that is increasingly available for garment making, but it's a much lighter weight drapey fabric. Okay, so satin or sateen weave is another type of weave that you will probably find when shopping for dressmaking fabrics. So this weave pattern is created by the threads passing under one thread and then passing over 3 or 4 threads. So this means that more of the threads are uninterrupted and pushed towards the right side of the fabric, or floated on the right side of the fabric, resulting in a nice sheen. Okay, so to clarify, when I say sateen, I'm not saying satin in a silly way. They refer to different fabrics and are spelt differently. So both satin and sateen are produced by the same weave pattern, that under one over several pattern, resulting in that sheen. The difference is the fibres that are used. So satin is made using long filament fibres. So traditionally that's silk, but cheaper synthetic versions using nylon and polyester are also available. The long filament fibres reflect more light, so these fabrics are pretty shiny. Sateen is made using short, stable filament fibres, including cotton and rayon. So these shorter filament fibres are not able to reflect as much light. So whilst the weave pattern gives them a sheen, they're not like shiny. I hope that makes sense. So as I just explained with twill, however, the word sateen has grown to refer to not just a type of weave, but also as a descriptor to a specific type of commonly found fabric. So sateen is usually made from cotton and is frequently blended with elastane to produce like a stable medium weight fabric, and that can work well for trousers or more structured fitted dresses. Lighter weight sateens suitable for blouses and more flowy dresses, they can be found, but generally speaking, when you see the word sateen or cotton sateen, it is usually that slightly thicker fabric that's more suitable for trousers or slightly more structured dresses. Okay, so another word that you'll find in a fabric shop that is related to weave is crepe. So crepe actually refers to a variety of fabrics, but all of them tend to have a slightly granular, moss-like textured appearance. So crepe is actually made using plain weave pattern, the one in, one out kind of pattern. But they tend to look and behave quite differently from regular plain weave fabrics because the threads are handled in different ways. So some crepe fabrics are made by twisting or altering the tension of the yarn as they are woven, and some are made by applying heat or chemicals. So crepe tends to have like a really wonderful like drapey quality, but it is available in quite a range of thicknesses. So generally speaking, the fibre used will be the good indicator of how thick the fabric is, and therefore what type of garment is going to be best suited for. So lots of different fibres are used to make crepe, but wool crepe and polyester crepe are probably the most common. They are often used for suits and streamlined dresses or skirts. Viscose crepe fabrics are also growing in popularity for garment sewing, and they tend to be much lighter and more suitable for tops and dresses with like gathers and ruffles, and really making the most of that kind of drapey quality. Okay, so let's quickly go through some more woven fabrics you might come across on a fabric website or in a fabric shop that don't neatly fit into these classifications I just mentioned. Okay, so double gauze, or even triple gauze, is also available. So double gauze is made from loosely woven cotton, and it kind of looks like cheesecloth or muslin. It's got that kind of texture to it. So the difference is that it's comprised of 2, or in case of triple gauze, 3 layers that have actually been attached together at regular intervals. So the loose weave, it gives it a really airy quality, and it's kind of got almost like squishy texture, and it's largely suited to kind of like relaxed summery garments. Okay, corduroy, or also known simply as cord. So this is a fabric that probably everyone's heard of. It features lines of like a velvety pile. So these lines can be tiny and close together, and this is often called needle cord, or they can be fatter and further apart, and these are often gauged in wales. So the wale number of a cord fabric refers to the number of lines per inch, which can be useful to know if you're buying online. Needle cord is usually very soft, and it can make lovely cozy like shirts and dresses, and it's also often used in baby and children's wear. The thicker wale cords are usually used in similar applications to denim, so for like dungarees, pinafores, trousers and jackets, that type of thing. You can find cord made in various fibres, sometimes it has some stretch in there as well. So the last fabric term in the woven section that I'm going to mention is jacquard. So jacquard is actually kind of like an umbrella term, but all of the fabrics that go into that bracket have a design or motif woven into them, into the actual like weave pattern itself. So they can be made just from one colour, or they can have different colours woven into them as part of the design. So there are lots of different types of jacquard fabric that are suitable for garment making, including brocade and matelassy. You can find jacquards made in a range of fibres, including wool, cotton and silk. So they can really range in thickness and the amount of drape or body and such. But generally they're pretty fancy looking. Okay, so that's woven fabrics. Now let's talk about the other camp, knitted fabrics, aka knit fabric. So knitted fabric is constructed from yarn by means of a series of interlocked loops. So the size of the stitch used, the size of the needles, and the thickness of the yarn all will dictate the delicacy or chunkiness of the fabric, whether they are knitted by hand or by machine. Okay, so confusingly, some fabric businesses refer to all knit fabric as jersey, but other fabric businesses use the term jersey to refer specifically to single jersey. Okay, so let's discuss the most common types of knit fabric that you're likely to want to find for making clothes. So, single jersey. So, jersey has 2 distinct sides, one plain and one purl. So, it's what you typically think of as like classic t-shirt fabric. Classic t-shirts are made from 100% cotton jersey. However, jersey can be made from many different fibres, for example, bamboo, viscose or merino wool, and different blends, so like cotton and polyester or cotton and lycra. Jersey has mechanical stretch, meaning that the type of stitch will allow the fabric to stretch when you pull it in opposite directions. However, the stretch and recovery will obviously always be improved if there is an elastane content. So jersey can vary greatly in weight, from like stable, durable, like heavier weight t-shirt fabric to like the slinkiest, lightest weight fabric you can imagine. Okay, another type of knit fabric is called interlock. So you don't see interlock in fabric shops all that much, but I think that's a real shame because it is really lovely. So interlock looks like double-sided single jersey, but it is thicker and it's got greater stability. It is like a really good option for those who are new to sewing with knit fabrics because it's one of like the easier knit fabrics to work with. Plus, it's got this really lovely soft feel and like smooth appearance. Personally, I've only ever seen interlock made from 100% cotton. Okay, ribbing, aka ribbed knit. So ribbing is identifiable, unsurprisingly, by the lines or ribs running vertically down the length of the fabric. These make it super stretchy and therefore it's almost always the fabric of choice for like neckbands, cuffs and waistbands on t-shirts and sweatshirts. So another change that people that have come back to sewing more recently might notice is that ribbing is increasingly available in fabric shops for the purposes of cuffs and bands. So it's usually like a cotton and elastane blend, and it's becoming available in like a big variety of colours. So the ribbing that's being sold for the purposes of cuffs and bands is often manufactured and sold in like narrow tubes. Lighter weight rib knits can also sometimes be found for garment sewing. They're usually very soft and very stretchy, so really great for like vest or tank tops and pyjamas and such. And on the other end of the scale, sometimes you can find thicker, chunkier weight rib knits for sale, which are used for like colder weather garments, such as like roll neck rib tops and dresses. Right, sweatshirt fleece. This is an easily recognisable fabric because it's got a smooth face and a fluffy, fleecy back, which is made by mechanically brushing the fibres. Sweatshirt fleece is, unsurprisingly, great for making sportswear garments including sweatshirts, hoodies and jogging bottoms. It's usually made from cotton, but is often blended with polyester and or elastane. There's actually quite a variety of thickness available in sweatshirt fleece, so bear that in mind when you're ordering online. Okay, French terry, aka loop back terry. So from the right side, French terry looks very much like sweatshirt fleece. However, on the reverse, you get these little characteristic loops of thread rather than the fluffy brushed appearance of sweatshirt fleece. So as with fleece fabric, it's available in a variety of weights and it's usually made from cotton with or without an elastane content, but you can get it in other fibres as well. There's a French terry made from modal and elastane that Fabric Godmother sell, and it's just so drapey and gorgeous, and I've made like loads of things for it, including like drapey cardigans and winter pyjamas. So French terry generally is a lovely option for sweatshirts and joggers or casual tops, dresses and shorts, depending on the weight. Right, fleece. So fleece fabrics, including the thicker variety polar fleece, are almost always made from polyester. As you probably know, fleece has excellent insulating qualities whilst being comparatively lightweight. Fleece tends also not to be very stretchy. One more type of knit fabrics that I want to talk about, and that is Ponte Roma, which is also known as Ponte de Roma, Punto de Roma, or Roma jersey. So this is another excellent option for those who are new to sewing or those who are afraid of sewing knits. So it is a commonly found variety of double knit, meaning that it is created using 2 sets of needles, and it's effectively like double the thickness of most jerseys. So this extra thickness means that it is easier to handle when you're sewing it, and the finished garments tend to skim over rather than like cling to the body. Ponte usually has a plain, smooth appearance on one side and a slightly more textured look on the other. So usually Ponte Romas are like solid fabrics. However, textured, striped and printed Pontes are now becoming a bit more easy to find in fabric shops too. So cheaper Pontes tend to be made from polyester, but they can also be made from cotton, wool or synthetic blends, and more frequently like a poly viscose elastane blend. Okay, so we've talked about fibres and the ways that fabric can be formed. And we've encountered a lot of the words that we might come across when we're shopping for fabric or in the list of fabric suggestions on a pattern. So you might also be able to use some of this knowledge to reverse identify some of the fabric you already own, including the fabric that your garments are made from. I've definitely not covered every fabric term or fabric type that you'll find in a fabric shop or a website. Plus, unhelpfully, there are often multiple, including regional terms for the same thing. Or something particular you're searching for might be listed under an umbrella term, such as Ponte Roma being listed under double knit. But to summarise, What gives a fabric its properties and behaviours is the interplay between what fibres have been used and the way that the fabric has been formed. And it's these properties and behaviours that makes a fabric more or less suitable for a particular project. So the best way to get a handle on what fabric titles are more likely to be suitable for your project is by literally getting a handle on it. So if you can shop for fabric in person, then always unroll a decent amount from the bolt or the roll to see what it's like. So like, what happens when you hold it up against your body, when you shake it about, when you take a handful and you crunch it up and then you release it, or what happens when you give it a good stretch in various directions and then let go. If you're doing shopping online, gathering knowledge will take a bit more of a concerted effort, but it is totally doable. So check if the description of the listing has any advice on project suitability. Order a swatch if you can, or if that's not an option, consider emailing the company for more information. And if you do order some fabric online, please don't be completely wedded to your original plan of use, because it might feel and behave a little bit differently than what you're expecting when it eventually arrives. So something I've never had the patience to do, but I think is a great idea, is to make your own little fabric resource book. Obviously, you can make this as simple or as elaborate as you wish, but basically I'm talking about a notebook in which you fasten swatches of fabric and then note down the name, plus any fibre content info or anything else. So you can actually buy professionally produced versions of these type of swatch books, but they are eye-wateringly expensive. Plus, they will most likely include heaps of info and swatches on fabrics that you're never actually going to want to sew with. So creating your own little reference on fabrics that appeal to you will be super useful. But for me, one of the best ways to get a quick handle on what types of garments a fabric may be suitable for is to see what garments are commonly made from it. So I do an internet image search, then I think about my experience of touching and interacting with those types of garments. I had to do that for both gabardine and chambray whilst researching this episode, actually. And remember, whether you buy fabric in person or online, you'll need to wash your fabric to get a truer idea of what it's like. There could be coatings or stiffeners on there that radically alter the handle and behaviour of a fabric until it's washed away. So I really hope that this episode has helped to demystify some garment fabric terms and types. Happy sewing! Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!